Greetings, and tonight I'm going to record a video before I go to bed that I'll upload first thing in the morning. I want to discuss one thing before I start this. This is going to be my top 20 defensemen in the league. Now, people are still talking about my Giroux. How can he have Giroux at center? Here's two things. First off, he took over 1,000 faceoffs, so he did play center parts this year. Secondly, while I was doing research for this, I looked at all-star voting, and there were two people who picked Giroux as second as the best center in the league this past year, and 5 that picked him as the third best center in the league this year. Meaning 7 votes went to Claude Giroux at center. So it reminds me of when Alex Ovechkin almost was on both the left wing and right wing all-star teams for the NHL because he got votes for both, even though he was played on his wrong wing that year. So, you know, it's just one of those things. But it is my best performing video this year, or this month. One of the best of the year. So thank you. I think it's 4th or 5th this year. So, all right. Before I get to this list, I'm going to do honorable mentions, which might be considered spoilers. Mark Giordano, Cam Fowler, Ryan Suter, Shea Weber, Duncan Keith, Eric Johnson, Risto Ristolainen, Zach Werenski, Matt Dumba, Keith Yandel, Torrey Krug, Chris Letang. I'll throw in a Justin Schultz just to show that he's not in the top 20 this year and he was in the top 10 last year. And I'm going to do the top 10 in one video, and then, or I'll do the 20 through 11 in one video and then 10 through 1 in the other. That way it's not too long of a video. Number 20. Keep wanting to say Dave Manson. Josh Manson of the Anaheim Ducks. You know, I really debated about this. I was going to put Suter at 30th. And I looked at Manson's stats, and I remembered watching Anaheim games last year, and I realized Cam Fowler is seen as their best defenseman. But Manson is a guy who really, really impressed me last year. And again, I'm going with my gut with this list. So Manson, for me, gets 20th. I couldn't honorable mention him. He had the best plus-minus in the league. I know how people feel about plus-minus. I get it. I'm fine with that. But his stats were very good. He's a brick house out there, and I'm telling you, Manson is only going to get better. Number 19. Now, some of this is based on what I saw in the playoffs. Niskanen was fantastic for Washington in the playoffs. He was better at the start than I think he was at the end. But his play in that first round was really, really solid, and I can't justify not having him in the top 20. I gave this guy a lot of flack over the last couple of years. I have to give him credit. I have to give him credit because he played fantastic in the playoffs, and a big reason why people are taking Washington to stay where they are. Their blue line is a big part of that. Their blue line was great taking them to the Stanley Cup, so why not? Number 18. You know, I really agonized about putting Charlie McAvoy on the list. And then I realized if Charlie McAvoy played for the Islanders or the Rangers or anybody else, I'd have no problem putting him on the list. Because Charlie McAvoy plays for the Bruins, there's a part of me that says, I don't want to seem like I'm being a homer. But Chara's not on the list. Krug is not on the list. Krug is a great offensive defenseman, not great defensively. McAvoy can do everything. McAvoy's the best all-around defenseman in Boston since Chara was in his prime. And Chara won some Norris trophies. I wouldn't rule out McAvoy for winning one, but there's a lot of really solid defensemen, so I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't win one. Number 17. Nate Schmidt was kind of an unknown going into last season. I mean, we knew he was going to be good. We had no idea he was going to be this good. I had to have somebody from Vegas in here. I thought about Colin Miller, but Miller doesn't get the kind of ice time that Schmidt does. I know Schmidt doesn't put up the numbers that some of the other guys on this list do, but I'm a guy who is very outspoken about how points shouldn't be the sole determining factor of what a great defenseman is. So I felt that I could justify putting Schmidt on the list, and I could give McNabb an honorable mention. I might as well. I could give Jake Muzzin an honorable mention, too, while I'm at it. And I might as well do that. At number 16, Do you know what blue line gets a lot of flack? Toronto's. Now, I am not convinced that 1 through 6 and the depth overall, that this is a team who's got a blue line that can go through 4 rounds of playoffs. And that's my opinion. But Morgan Rielly is a better number 1 defenseman than I think he gets credit for. He puts up a lot of points, and I think once the maturity's there, and once he rounds out his game a little bit more on the defensive side of things, I think he could be a top 10 defenseman in the league. Do I think he ever wins the Norris Trophy? As I stated with McAvoy, there are so many good young defensemen. That's kind of an impossible thing to just, I'm going to predict this. But Rielly, I think he gets some praise from Toronto defensemen that might put him ahead of where he should be, but I also think he gets criticism from fans that don't like Toronto that he shouldn't get. So I'm kind of in the middle on this one. Number 15. You know, the Colorado turnaround. I almost could have put Patrick Nemeth up here. Nemeth was amazing in the playoffs. But Tyson Barrie was the best defenseman for Colorado overall. And you know, he was a guy that was seen as out. He won't be there the whole year. And then, surprise, he's still there and Colorado's in the playoffs. So, you know, any talk about Colorado ripping it apart and starting over, that's gone. The Duchesne trade seems to have fixed whatever was going on with Colorado, or it's a coincidence. Perhaps if they hadn't made the Duchesne trade, things would have got better anyways. But I think Girard had something to do with it too. So, you know, Barrie I will give the number 15 spot, and I don't know that he would have made the top 20 if I'd done a top 20 last year. Number 14. If you want to talk about guys that I had to go back and forth on. What I used for this list was simple. I did look at points. I looked at Norris votes. I looked at first and second team all-star votes. I looked at plus minus. I looked at ice time. And I know there was another statistic I used as well. There were a lot of different statistics, and I listed everybody, and then I used that to come up with this. Ekman-Larsson is one of those guys who flies under the radar because of where he plays. As an Arizona Coyote, he will always kind of be forgotten by people who follow, especially if you're in the eastern side of things. You may lose track of some guys on the West Coast because their games don't start until 10:30 your time. And honestly, if I lived on the East Coast, I wouldn't feel like staying up to watch West Coast games either. That's just reality. But Ekman-Larsson is a damn fine defenseman. And honestly, if he was... Let's just say that Arizona didn't keep him. They traded him to Toronto. Toronto fans would fall in love with OEL right away. And if they didn't have to give anybody up off their blue line and they added OEL, it's not just contender, but I might jump on and say, yeah, they could be favorites. That's why whenever a Leafs fan says, what if we get Karlsson? You might win the cup depending on what you give up to get Erik Karlsson. The thing is, Pierre Dorion, while he's made some interesting moves, he's not moving Karlsson to Toronto. And I don't see Toronto giving up what they would have to get Karlsson, because it would be quite the package. Number 13. This one was tough. Now, I've gone through periods in time where I have not completely appreciated Byfuglien's game in Winnipeg. And I know there will be people who argue Josh Morrissey's a better all-around defenseman than Byfuglien at this stage of the game. Morrissey, who's still an RFA at the time that I'm recording this. But, you know, Byfuglien to me is a little bit of everything. He's got that intimidation factor. Does he cross that line? Yes. Did he make Nashville mad? Yep. Subban made Winnipeg mad. Byfuglien made Nashville mad. And then Byfuglien made Vegas mad. And that's kind of his game, as well as being a pretty solid offensive defenseman and a guy who maybe he's not at his peak, but he's still close enough that for me I can justify him being number 13. Number 12. Now, when I was looking at all of the lists, I was looking at points and plus minus and Norris voting. Provorov doesn't really factor in. Provorov gets overshadowed by Ghost. So because Ghost overshadows him, Provorov kind of flies under the radar. But I watched enough Philly this year to know that Provorov is a fantastic blue liner who I think this year, I think when you look at a guy who is going to really come into his own, I think it's Provorov's time. I think this could be it for him this year. And I'm really kind of excited to see how he does for Philly. That blue line in Philly overall is a very exciting thing to watch. So I think there's going to be some big things out of that blue line, and I think Provorov, I think a Norris Trophy could be in his future. But again, he's got ghosts sitting in front of him. Number 11, and I'll stop this half of the video here, is a guy who was in Norris talks really early in the season, even at the midway mark of the season. Pietrangelo was in those talks, and his uncle pronounces it Pietrangelo, which is why I called him Pietrangelo, and then everybody went nuts, so it's Pietrangelo. But regardless of whether he's in or out of the mix for Norris, he is still an excellent defenseman. So I could have gone with one of the other defensemen in St. Louis, because St. Louis does have defense by committee. And yet, he is the best one of said committee. It is really hard to come up with 20 defensemen. As I said, I went over this. I probably spent about an hour going over lists, writing it down again, and then moving guys around. And McAvoy and Schmidt dropped from where I had them initially. But the top 10 kind of stayed the same. The top 10 didn't really change. And you'll have to watch part 2 to see the top 10.